Hello and welcome to our presentation on data collection and CSPR reporting for neglected and delinquent facilities. My name is Dan Frummel. I'm the Director of Non-Traditional Educational Programming, and I'm joined today by Aaron Christian, my colleague in West Tennessee, and Jackie Jacobson, our colleague in Middle Tennessee. Here you'll see a map of the different regions that the different non-traditional consultants cover. If you have any questions following this presentation, please reach out to your assigned consultant so that they can assist you. Today we're going to talk about the data collection process for CSPR, the Consolidated State Performance Report. We're going to go through the purpose, the basic requirements, reporting, evaluating, data collection, and then close with data quality. Starting with the purpose of the CSPR, the Consolidated State Performance Report. The federal funding for Title I-D programs is contingent upon demonstration of student progress in their academic and vocational outcomes, and it's critical that programs provide accurate data in order to assess these key student outcomes. The collection of high-quality data is important for Title I programs at the state and local levels, and it's a basic requirement of Title I programs is to use evaluation data to plan and improve subsequent programming for participating children and youth. And so you'll hear us say this several times, but the overall purpose of this is for us to be able to look back and evaluate the effectiveness of our Title I program over the past year, as that'll help to inform our planning and funding decisions for the upcoming year. I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Aaron Christian.
Next, we'll be talking about the basic requirements. For the basic requirements, you will see on the screen that there is a chart detailing the 5 elements in the program: planning, funding, monitoring, reporting, and evaluating. Today we will be talking about reporting and evaluating. In reporting, Consolidated State Performance Report contains several elements. It is administered by the U.S. Department of Education. It is required of all states. It is mandatory for all districts. Measures effectiveness of the facilities and programs. Funding is contingent on demonstration of progress and outcomes, both academic and vocational, and the reporting year is July 1 through June 30th. Districts submit data for the following indicators: student and facility count, demographics, racial and ethnic categories, age, gender, disability, and limited English proficiency status. Transition services, academic and vocational outcomes within the facility within 90 calendar days after exit, and academic achievement or performance in reading and mathematics.
Now let's talk about evaluation and how facilities and districts can use the CSPR data. So the data from the CSPR can be used to identify data quality problems, which can be used to improve data collection. They can inform key management and funding decisions. They can identify and disseminate promising practices based on programs that have demonstrated success, and they're used to monitor facilities and programs. So again, at the heart of the purpose of this data is that it allows us to reflect on how things have gone this past year, examine how effective our Title I program has been, and then make planning decisions for the upcoming school year. The meat of this presentation is really going to talk about data collection. So what are the data elements that facilities and school districts should be collecting from July to June each year in the different areas and then how that's reported out. A couple key definitions before we jump into the different areas. First definition is unduplicated count. So an unduplicated count is one that counts each student only once, even if the student was admitted to a facility or program more than one time within the reporting year. Whereas a duplicated count is a count in which students can be counted for each one of their stays in the program. For example, if Katie was enrolled in the facility from August to December, and then again from February to June, she would be counted twice. And so you'll see as we go through the different data elements, we'll be indicating where that element might be a unduplicated count and where it might be a duplicated count. And the final definition is under long-term students. So long-term students are those who have been enrolled in a program for 90 or more consecutive calendar days. Multiple admissions may not be added together. So now we'll move into the different areas that we're going to be collecting data. The first area is in the average length of stay, and this is a duplicated count, and obviously this is looking at your overall number of students within the facility. So this number should represent the average number of days per stay for each type of facility or program during the reporting year. And students who have multiple stays can be included in this average. So that's where we see that it's a duplicated count. Because the data requested are for an average of days within the reporting year, the average length of stay for each program type should not exceed 365 days. So it's an important piece to remember when we get to our data quality checks. We'll mention this again at the end, but when all the data is collected from the facility and sent to the districts will be required to submit that data to the Tennessee Department of Education via an online stack through FormStack, which it'll be the same form that we used last year. And so as we go through this and we talk about each one of the reporting areas, we're going to show you a screenshot of what that looks like. And that way, if you have any questions, one of the first things you can do is go back and look at the PowerPoint, and you'll see for each category specifically where that information goes in the FormStack survey. The next area that we'll be reporting is in the student count. Again, this is a facility level student count. So this number, we report the number of unduplicated students and the number of long-term students. It's important that we separate the long-term and short-term students because that information will be needed in the academic achievement section. The start date for long-term student counts is when the student's enrollment within the facility begins, not necessarily when their educational programming begins. So again, if you had a student that maybe admitted into the program during fall break and school was not in session, that would still count as their start date. You wouldn't have to wait until school was back in session to start their start date. Again, this is an unduplicated count. And here we separate a little bit in the next two slides the difference between student counts and unduplicated counts. So the criteria for being reported in the CSPR data are not the same as those for the annual child count. So if you remember, we do the annual child count in the fall of each year. And that's where we're counting students for a 30-day period of time in October and November. And that's used to generate funding. The student count is a count of all the students who have been in your program, all the students that have benefited from the Title I-A or D programming or services during that school year. So it should be higher than that annual count. This graphic here just again shows that breakdown, showing the difference between the student count and the annual count, because at times there is confusion between the two. So again, your annual count is driving your funding. The student count is what we report in the CSPR data. and it's used to help measure the program effectiveness. Once you have your student count number, you're going to go ahead and input that into FormStack. Again, districts will get a survey link to this. We'll also send out a PDF document so that you can take a look at the form in its entirety if you'd like. The next area that I'm going to move on to is demographic data. And as we get, so we've talked about the average count, we've talked about the student count, and those are really overall large statistical numbers that are being reported for the entire facility. As we move into these other areas, this area is collected on the individual student level. One of the easiest ways for facilities to collect this data as students come in and out of the program is to use the information sheet that we have provided to districts and facilities. And if you use this information sheet and fill it out when a student enters the program and fill it out when a student leaves the program, at the end of the year, at the end of June, you'll be able to sit down and go through all of that data and come up with your aggregate data. And so what we've done here is, as we talk about each one of the different sections, we've put a screenshot of what that looks like on that individual student collection sheet. So again, talking about the demographic data, and this goes back to the unduplicated count, should be equal to the subtotals of each demographic category. And all demographic categories should be equivalent to each other. And so this is a good way to check your data quality. So for example, if the unduplicated count of students equals 120 students, then the racial and ethnic total should equal 120. The gender total should equal 120. The grade level total should equal 120. And the age counts should equal 120. In the demographic data, we're reporting race and ethnicity in 7 racial and ethnic categories. We're reporting the age the student was when he or she left the facility, or the age at the end of the reporting year, June 30th, if the student is still enrolled. And we're going to report the grade level the student was in when he or she left the facility, or the grade level at the end of the reporting year, June 30th, if the student is still enrolled. So we saw that in our data from last year, where we had students who maybe in the fall were in one grade and they were able to get enough credits, or for whatever reason they were promoted to the next grade within one school year. So again, we're going to report the grade they were in when they left the facility, or the grade they're in at the end of the reporting period. Other areas that are collected in this are students with disabilities, limited English proficiency students, and gender. Again, once you have that information collected, that information will then be aggregated, sent to the school district, and the school district will then put that information into FormStack, and you can see what that looks like here. So for example, if you look at the box under gender, you would list how many males there were in the program for the year and how many females there were in the program for the year, and then that total. That total, again, should be equal to your unduplicated student count. So your student count should match up with your totals in these boxes here. Again, just a continuation of the demographic data. All right, the next area we look at collecting is in transition services. And you can see again on the individual sheet, this is what it looks like. The student receives transition services that address further schooling and or employment. It's a yes or no question. And if your program or placement is unable to collect transition service data, please indicate that on the survey. Transition services are an unduplicated count. And the definition: supports and services that promote effective practices across multiple domains that impact a youth's successful return to the community. And only services that help a student return to and be productive in their communities through continued education, vocational training, or employment should be counted in this table. Some examples of transition services: developing an educational plan for the student, developing a vocational plan for the student, preparing students for reentry into education or work, or identifying and providing supports needed to ensure student success in returning to school or employment. A good example of this: some facilities, when a student is getting ready to discharge, they will work with the school district that the child is going back to. They might participate in an IEP meeting, or they might participate in a transition meeting to help give the school a heads up on what strategies worked with this child, what supports this child might need to be successful in their next educational environment. That would be an excellent example of a transition service that a facility could count as one of their outcomes. At the end, you total up how many students receive transition services in the facility, and that information is reported to the LEA. The LEA will input that information into Form Stack in this section. All right, moving on to academic and vocational outcomes. Again, we start off with a screenshot of what this looks like on the individual form here. So if you're filling this out as the students are in the program for the different things that they're earning, if they're earning a high school credit, if they earn a GED, if they obtain employment, you would mark that on the form here. Academic and vocational outcomes are a duplicated count. There's no length of stay requirement. So if you have a student in your program for only 2 days and somehow they manage to achieve an academic or vocational outcome, you'd be able to count that in your data. It's actual and not anticipated outcomes. So if you have a student who thinks that they're going to get a job in the community when they leave, they have a really good prospect, that doesn't count. They have to have the job offer in hand for it to be an actual outcome. And one student achieving multiple outcomes. The same student may be counted as having attained more than one outcome. For example, the same student may have obtained employment and returned to a school district. And so in that case, the student would have 2 outcomes. Multiple student enrollments are allowed. So data for academic and vocational outcomes are not restricted to a student's most recent facility enrollment or exit period. If a student has multiple enrollments in a facility during a reporting year, all outcomes achieved should be included. For example, if a student is enrolled from September to December and receives a credit, and then is enrolled from March to May and gains employment, both outcomes would be counted. And student counts, not outcome counts. So these counts reflect the number of students attaining a specific outcome. They are not counts of the outcome itself. So for example, if a student earns 4 credits while in the program, this would only count as one outcome under earning high school credits. In the same vein, if they had if they received 2 job offers for employment, that would just count as one outcome in obtaining employment. All right, this section is probably the area that created the most confusion over this past year, and so I want to take some time to really walk through this and provide some strategies. There are 2 ways that data are collected. Data can be collected in the facility or 90 days after exit. Data collected in the facility, this refers to outcomes achieved or attained during any point within the reporting year while the student was enrolled in the facility or program. So the example we give, a student received an outcome of obtaining credits while enrolled in the facility. Or maybe the student completed their GED while they were in the facility. This was an area that we felt like overall everyone was doing a good job with. Everyone was able to collect outcomes when students were in the facility. The area where we saw some struggles during our monitoring was the 90 days after exit. And so the CSPR data for all facilities not only requires us to collect data while the student is in our program, but it also requires us to collect data up to 90 days after exit. Okay, and it's important to note that exiting does not refer to transfer to another facility within the juvenile justice or child welfare system. So if you have a student that goes from your facility into a juvenile detention center or to another residential facility, then you would not follow that student. But for many students, they're going home, they're going back into their communities, and so we need to follow them and ask those questions about the follow-up outcomes to see how they have done. So we want to see, when they went back to their high school, did they get a high school credit? Did they graduate? Did they get employment? A couple of things to note on this. These are 90-day outcomes, but you don't have to do them at the 90-day mark. You can do them anywhere up to the 90-day mark. So many programs that we've talked with have said that they only follow students for 30 days after discharge or 60 days after discharge. And that's okay. You can go ahead and collect that data at 30 days or at 60 days, okay? It's important, a lot of facilities have very strict rules about contacting a student after discharge, so you also want to make sure that you get the proper releases in place for following that student. Another important piece to note on the 90-day follow-up is that there is no expectation that a facility is able to contact 100% of the students that discharge from the program. So you won't be penalized if you're only able to contact 50% of the students or 40% of the students. We just ask that you try. We understand that families tend to move, phone numbers tend to change, and at times people might not always want to answer your calls. And that's okay. As long as you're making that effort, you're going to be able to collect some of this data to show the positive outcomes for students leaving your facility. So let's go through some of these academic and vocational outcomes. Section 1 is enrolled in their local school district or school. Pretty straightforward. The number of students who return to or enrolled in a local district school. This obviously would only occur as part of the 90-day follow-up post-discharge outcomes. Section 2, earned a GED or obtained a high school diploma. It goes without saying, but they shouldn't have both in there. Section 3, earned high school course credits. And again, all of these could occur within the facility or after they leave the facility. Earning high school credits, a lot of times you're going to see that that's marked in both areas. Or enrolled in a GED high-set program. Number 3, accepted or enrolled in post-secondary education. So the number of students accepted and or enrolled in independent post-secondary programs. Enrolled in job training course or programs. The number of students enrolled in a course program that focuses on preparing students for a specific vocation. Obtained employment. The number of students who received job offers. And going to the employment, that should be outside of the program as well. Academic and vocational outcomes, again, you're going to see that this is what it looks like in FormStack. So after that information is gathered on the individual forms, tallied by the facilities, and then sent to the school district will input this data in FormStack. And then our final area, in the area of academic achievement, again, this is what it looks like on the individual form. And this is where we are doing our pre and post testing in math and reading to look at it so that we can go back and look at our academic data to see what gains our students are making in these two subject areas. For academic achievement, you only want to count students who have been in the program for 90 days or more. And if a student has multiple enrollments, only count the most recent testing where the student was in the program for 90 days or more. Again, once that information is tallied up, that information will be sent to the school district to input into FormStack, and you can see how it's reported here. So it talks about long-term students with negative grade level changes from pre to post-test exams, long-term students with no grade level change, with up to 1 full grade level and then over 1 full grade level. And so that's how the data should be separated, how many students fit into each one of those categories. So again, the data is going to be collected on the individual forms from July 1st to June 30th. So every student that comes into the program, you need some sort of mechanism. We recommend that you use this form to collect data on them, and then when they leave, you're filling out that form again, and that way you have all that information to report at the end of the year. Facilities are then aggregating their data before sending to the LEA. This here is just a screenshot of some of the sample forms that NDTAC has available on their website. Those resources are listed at the end of this presentation. Again, you can just see the different areas that they have listed there. So in step 3, a link will be sent to the LEAs to input information in an online survey via FormStack. Again, we'll also send out a PDF version of that as well. LEAs will verify data. We're going to talk about that data quality and verification piece in a minute, and then input the aggregate data from each facility into a separate survey. So for example, if there are 2 facilities within the district, then 2 separate surveys will be completed. And then step 5, the department will review and verify data before sending to the U.S. Department of Education. Again, this just breaks down the responsibilities again, and we've talked about this throughout the presentation. The facility has the majority of the work on this because they're obviously actually working with the students. So they're collecting the data on each individual student as they enter and exit the program. Then they are required to aggregate that data before sending it to the LEA. The LEA collects that data from the facility, verifies the data, and then submits the data to the Tennessee Department of Education. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Erin, who's going to walk us through data quality.
Okay, for data quality, tips for checking your data quality. Student count. Your student count for the year should be significantly higher than your daily census. For example, if your program has the capacity to serve 30 students or 30 beds at a time, your student count will probably be between 60 and 90. So if we think about traditional neglected and delinquent facilities, you usually have a 90 to 120 day window for treatment. So if you have 30 beds and you have that kind of a timeline for your students to roll over, then you would look at between 60 and 90 different students during the year. So that's why it's significantly higher than your daily census. And is your student count similar to last year? Did you have a dramatic increase or decrease? And if so, please provide an explanation in the survey data. Also, in academic achievement, do the results make sense? Some programs reported having an extremely high number of students making academic gains for more than 1 year. Double check to ensure this is an accurate reflection of student progress. We have seen this several times in looking at the data, where you have children that come in and are in a distressed state when they are pre-tested, and then they achieve several levels of achievement when they are post-tested at the 90 days and further on out. So this is just something that you want to verify and make sure that you're watching for the academic achievement levels. In demographics, students with disabilities seem to be underreported in last year's data collection. We saw this in many districts, so just make sure that you're verifying your SPED counts and that that's reflected in your survey data.
The following is a list of resources that we've covered while we went through here. Majority of them come from NDTAC, and so we encourage you, if you want to learn more about the CSPR data collection process, please feel free to review these resources as well. And then finally, we are here to assist you in this process. So as you get into the data collection process, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you have. As a reminder, the data collection period ends at the end of June, and we are going to be sending out the survey links in July, and we're asking that all of the data be compiled and reported to TDOE by the end of July. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and thank you so much for your time and attention today.